Okay, so in today's episode, we have Joe Landolina here, and most people might know Joe because he's been around for quite a while now. I mean, there's even a TEDx that I saw of you from 2014, and I think I came across this video a while ago before I started biomedical engineering. But when I was preparing for this episode, I rewatched it again. So Joe is basically the CEO of Cresilon, which is sort of like a medical technology, or they call it biotech, some people, but I would like to call it a medical technology company that makes gel that prevents blood loss, basically. And this is based on several exciting compounds and everything. And the story of how Joe started to get to this point, it's quite exciting. So, yeah, before I even get started, I'm just honored to have you on the podcast, Joe. It's really an honor. And welcome to MedTech 101.
Of course, Rodney. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so just getting started then with the TEDx talk that I referenced in 2014. I think by that time you're already 22, you'd already been working on the gel. Was it the Vetigel or was it a different gel at the time that you're working on? And just to paint the picture, the Vetigel is the gel that you guys designed or that you invented when you're 17, and it's you're selling it commercially right now in for veterinary use. So that's for use in animals. But yeah, I mean, just fast forwarding back. Well, I don't know if it's fast forwarding or going back to 2014 because you'd already been doing it really well by then. So looking at the TED Talk, Joe, how did you get there? Did you start there?
Definitely. I was very lucky. I got a very early start into everything, and to my grandfather was also in the biotech industry. He was an executive for Hoffman La Roche for years, and in retirement he started a vineyard, which meant that there was a winery laboratory across the street from my house. And so the day that I learned how to walk, I learned how to go and do lab research. And it may not have been as fancy or as sophisticated as some of the work that's done at top tier universities, or what we're even doing today at Cresilon, but it was enough to get me interested. And so when I founded the company, I was 17 years old, and I was then a freshman at NYU's engineering school. And so by my senior year, which was 2014, we had built up enough notoriety where we had built a prototype of Vetigel, and we were able to show that the product could actually stop bleeding. And so that got the interest of a number of TEDx's. And so I think I've done about 3 TEDx talks, and then 1 TED main stage talk as a TED fellow. And it was really an amazing experience. So in 2014, I gave a TED talk in Rio, a TED Global 2014, and it really served as one of the launching pads for the company, because there's notoriety that you get within a community, within a city, or within a university, and then there's having a TED talk that brings millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people to your doorstep. It really allowed us to translate the project that we had worked on through undergrad into the pathway that turned into what Cresilon is today, which is a biomanufacturer with operations in 4 continents.
Nice, nice. That's really impressive. And I have to say, I'll be putting the link of that TED Talk in the description as well for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it was quite impressive, Joe, how you spoke there. You were quite articulated. You seemed to have been on top of everything. Is was that confidence also coming from the belief you have in this product you guys had created, or was it, or were you just born a public speaker? What would you say?
So I think I was lucky. I was always, if you'd come to see me in grade school, I was always the narrator at the school play. So I always enjoyed public speaking. But what I'll say is that with this product, it makes it really easy to get excited about it. The concept of saving lives and the ability to be able to stop bleeding so quickly as we can with our products is so exciting that it's hard to get nervous. It's hard to deny the impact of the technology, and it makes it really easy to do things like stand up on a stage in front of a bunch of people.
That's good. And just to put this into perspective in terms of how impactful this product is, I did a bit of research and I was reading an article that was published by the Scandinavian Journal of trauma, resuscitation, and emergency medicine. And here they stated that about every single year, about 60,000 people in the US sort of like lose their lives because of blood loss, right? And globally, they estimate it to be about 1.5 million people. So that's the size of people you basically going to be impacting with this product. So I don't know if you want to just give us a quick background then in terms of like how it works, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are thinking, okay, this is a life-saving product, but how could you explain that in a in a way that would make it easily understandable to a lot of people?
Of course. And so, what we do with our technology is effectively we make a really good adhesive. And I'll explain exactly how it works in a second. But really, what we're trying to do is create a material that will, when you flow it or deploy it onto a bleeding wound, whether that's a surgical bleed, like something that you would find in neuro or spinal surgery, or it's a massive trauma resulting from a gunshot or a motor vehicle accident, you want this product to get into all of the nooks and crannies of the injury. So be just flowable enough that it can fill the entire cavity, but be just strong enough that it creates a mechanical barrier against bleeding and then allows the patient to create their own clot. And that's exactly what we do. So our technology is based on two polysaccharides or long chains of sugar that are derived primarily from algae. So it's entirely plant-based. And we take these polymers and we purify them and mix them together into a pre-filled gel. And in fact, I have well, uh, just a
Nice.
sample of it right here. And so in this little 5 cc syringe, it looks almost like the consistency of hummus. And so it's this viscous paste that is completely plant derived that when you put it onto an injury, you can't observe exactly what's happening, but the product will almost instantaneously create a mechanical seal against that bleed. And then what happens next is where we differentiate ourselves because stopping the bleeding is all well and good, but if the patient can't have a clot of their own underneath, then when that product gets removed, the patient will rebleed. And that's obviously unacceptable. And so, what we do, or what the technology does, is it allows the patient to create their own clot without becoming incorporated within the gel. And a great example
Nice.
of that is if you cut yourself while shaving and you put toilet paper on it, whether it's on your face or your leg or somewhere else. You put that on, it'll stop bleeding in about 7 minutes. But then if that toilet paper goes away, the clot is inside of the strands of the toilet paper. You rip the clot off and you're bleeding again. With Vetigel or with our other technologies, it allows you to remove the product without disturbing the underlying clot. And what
Nice.
that looks like is it takes the time to hemostasis from 5 to 7 minutes and it shrinks that down to 2.5 seconds on average.
Well, so yeah, so I've got a few questions actually. Was this so exciting? Maybe it's because it's the engineer inside of me. But so first question, the premix that you guys make, does it come pre-mixed already, or is it something the patient or the surgeon sort of like does before they apply it?
So it was very important to us to have the premix completed without preparation for the surgeon. And so this syringe of Vetigel is just 5 milliliters of premix gel. There's no preparation that the surgeon needs to do other than removing the syringe from the pouch and uncapping the syringe.
Well, and so then does that then prolong the shelf life, or does it then what's the benefit besides the time it takes to use it? Does it give you guys a longer shelf life
So,
of
so
gel?
it leads to better stability, and so it allows
Nice.
us once you put it together. That I always describe making Vetigel like making a
Yeah.
souffle. It's very difficult while you're making it, but if you do it perfectly at the end, you have
Yes.
a really stable final product. Now, if it's
Nice.
while it's in the oven, if you look at it the wrong way, it'll collapse, and you're not going to have a good time. But once it ends up in the syringe, it ends up with a very stable material that will last. Vetigel right now is shelf stable for 18 months at room temperature.
Well, that's quite impressive. And the second point you touched on was that it allows the blood to clot, right? And just to give a quick sort of like breakdown for people who don't really know how clots function. The blood is made of several components, and one of them is platelets, right? That's what they call them. So little tiny fibers in there. That when so if you get a cut, it's sort of like they sort of join together and they stick together and they form a sort of like a seal, right, to prevent that blood loss. But in this case, what makes your gel really not become adhesive to that blood clot? Is it because of the from a chemical point of view, or is it just the way you have designed it so that it doesn't actually, adhere to the clot itself? So when you pull it out, you're not pulling the clot, and the clot stays behind.
So it's a mix of both.
Hmm.
There's both in the chemistry of the gel. There's nothing that binds strongly to tissue, including blood, and so most of the binding, not to get too chemical or too
Yes.
technical here,
Yes.
is ionic, which means that it's effectively using little charges in the gel to stick to little charges in the
Nice.
patient, and so those are very easily reversible binding, as opposed to a lot of strong adhesives that use covalent bonding. That
Yes.
once it bonds, you're gonna have a very difficult time taking it
Of
off,
course.
and
Yeah.
so it makes it really easy. And then the second thing is that mechanically the gel has no pores in it, and so that means that none of the fluid from the patient will be able to be absorbed by our gel, and vice versa. And as a result, any interaction happens only at the interface between the two. And not there's no mixing of gel with blood, and because of that, it means that it's a lot easier to peel the gel away without pulling the clot off. Unlike the toilet paper example that I mentioned earlier, where the blood, the clot, any other fluid from the patient will enter the toilet paper. And so when you try to take that toilet paper away, the clot is actually tangled around fibers within the toilet paper. And so it's not as if the toilet paper is sticking to the clot per se.
Sure.
It's just becoming part of the clot. And when you take it off, the whole thing comes off with it.
So makes sense. And no, that's really impressive, Joe. I have to say, I'm trying to stay as composed as much as I can. Uh, but from because I work in research as well, and this kind of stuff is really fascinating. So this then brings me to the question: when you guys started working with this in animals, was that part of the strategy to sort of like slowly work your way to human use? Because I know there's some really exciting news that happened last week for you guys, but I'm gonna get to that point. But for now, I just want to understand your strategy. When you started with animals, was that part of the sort of like proving the concept of the gel before you got to humans? What was the strategy behind that?
Exactly. So as we were starting Cresilon, 2012 was fairly early in our history. And for those of you who may not be locals to the New York area or the East Coast of the U.S., there was a major hurricane that hit New York at the end of 2012 called Hurricane Sandy. And it was devastating. So we're up here on the East Coast. We're not used to hurricanes or massive storms like that. And there were a number of lives lost. But on top of that, there was damage to a local zoo and aquarium, where there was an animal that was unable to be stopped or be saved because their bleeding couldn't be stopped, and the vet
Oh,
clinic had no product to be able to stop that bleeding. And so at that time, we realized that the animal health market was a viable option for us to move into. And the great thing about animal health is that it allows you to be able to trial and test out across a broad range of applications, because there's such a diversity in animal health of both species that are being treated as well as anatomies and different areas. So as an engineer, it's effectively a playground for us, where you have a market
makes
that
sense.
is nearly completely open, with very limited competition that works, and you get to try things out on amazing types of indications that you could never conceive of existing in the human space. And then when we get to it, it's one for one transferable, meaning that the learnings that we get out of animal health we can apply directly into the human space. And so we realized that animal health would be a great first stop for our technology, and so we developed Vetigel first, and Vetigel is our broad indication surgical product for animal surgery or veterinary surgery, and that's been on the market now since 2020. And Vetigel is now sold in about 30 countries around the globe, and so it's been incredibly exciting seeing patients' lives saved with that product, and now as we get into the news of our FDA clearance for humans, it's allowing us to start to expand that mission of saving lives into humans for the first
Oh.
time.
And that's really impressive, Joe. And just to also look at it to add on to the people listening, that when you start with animals, even from a regulatory affairs point of view, it's quite a good move because it's not as high as it will be for human beings, but then it gives you the way to sort of like prove the concept. And I guess this was part of the strategy of why you used the 510K route to market for the the you call it the CHG, which is the Cresilon Hemostatic Gel, which is what we're going to be touching on now. But I mean, looking at that, like I think you must be happy, Joe, because I mean you've been waiting for this moment for I don't know how many years now, 13 years. How long have you been waiting for this moment?
Well, it's been 13 years in the making, and so it's really nice to finally be able to get that clearance from FDA.
Nice.
But yeah, what I'll say is that CHG is Cresilon Hemostatic Gel is our first step into humans,
Yeah.
and so the what Cresilon has taken is what we call the path of least regulation, right? And the way that we look at that is using data sets that we generate that are revenue generating to defray the cost and the burden of moving into more and more difficult to enter markets. And
Yes.
so animal health was a great playground or
Yeah.
starting area for us because there's a real need and we're saving lives and we've been able to impact the lives of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of patients already in animal health. And
Nice.
we're making a real difference in that market and we're moving towards becoming standard of care there, which is incredibly exciting. And the great thing about animal health is that every indication that we're looking at in the human space, again, from neuro and spine surgery through to trauma to dentistry and minor bleeding like we have at CHG and everything in between, we've been piloting that in animal health in a real clinical setting in a way that actually helps patients and actually helps clinicians be able to perform medicine better. And so, as we approach the human space, that allowed us to use this 510K strategy, which allows us to start with smaller indications like minor bleeding, which is the first step for CHG, and then eventually begin to expand that out. Where the next stop on that train will be trauma care for gunshot wounds, stabbings, and major bleeds. And then from that point, moving into more surgical bleeds, for example, spine surgery.
No, that's really good. I think I would give you a round of applause for that work because it takes a long time to get to this point, and I'm really proud of that, and it's quite inspiring to hear that. And just for the users, well, not the users, but the audience listening, um, getting approval onto the market through the 510K is really good because it shows that the technology is well established. Otherwise, you will not get approved. So that's really good to see a product coming through that's well established in terms of technology wise, and this is going to be going to save lives. And then, but what classification then in terms of risk? What class is this CHG going to be? Is it a class one or class two product?
So, so strictly speaking, external hemostatics are unclassified devices, but they're regulated as class two.
All right. So yeah, it's a bit of paperwork for your Rex team. I'm sure they were excited with that clearance because it was a huge relief. And then no, that's really good. So and yeah, I did an episode earlier just trying to discuss the different classes of medical devices. And in Europe we have 2A, 2B. I know in the US just class two. But nonetheless, I just want to rewind back again because your story seems like a sort of like a Facebook story. I don't know if it makes sense because you started in the dorm room as well. So it's quite important for us to touch on that, and just go back to that. How did you go from your dorm room to now where you I think your company now has got about 60 people just mainly, but I know you also have sort of like a manufacturing site, but we can talk about that as well. So how have you done that transition to this point?
Sure, and so I mean, I think that first things first, it was a lot of naivete that allowed us to move forward because it takes, well, it takes a lot of not knowing what you don't know in order to, at 17 years old, say I'm going to forge forward with this. And so, we knew from the very beginning that we had something that really could impact lives. And it was really clear that this technology was special. And I think that that was the driving force in all of this, that it's so rare, in my opinion, in life sciences to have technology that is differentiated by multiple orders of magnitude as opposed to 10, 20, 30% better than competition. And so knowing that we were stewards of that came a responsibility of good stewardship with that technology. And what that meant was that we, through all of it, through thick and thin, there was this responsibility that we would have failed not only ourselves, but failed our patients by not being able to get this through. And so it was a very long and arduous path. And the biggest crux of that was that, unlike most biotechs or medical device companies do, Cresilon, because of the novelty of our technology, Vetigel is basically like making hummus like a vaccine. And there are lots of hummus manufacturers in the world and lots of vaccine manufacturers in the world, but
Yes.
no one has quite been stupid enough to try to do it together. And so we were one of the first. And as a result, we could not outsource our manufacturing. We couldn't outsource a lot of our testing. We couldn't outsource our regulatory work. And so we got put in this position several times over the development of the company, where it was either shut down the business because no one else could do this for us, or learn how to do it ourselves and try to do something that no one's ever done before. And so, uh, again, I'm not sure how many of your viewers will be able to see my background here, right? But my background may look a little bit odd, not like an office building of a startup that's raised nearly $100 million. But it's an old 1930s schoolhouse in the middle of Brooklyn that we found on Craigslist in 2013. And
Wow.
so, I mean, this isn't where we do our manufacturing, but it's still our headquarters. And just above me today was our first pilot plant. And so,
Wow.
we got scrappy. We found ways to get it done. We built our own clean rooms. We found labs from companies that had gone bankrupt, and we went in and we rented U-Hauls and we pulled equipment and shelves and flooring out of the walls and off the floors and drove them here to Brooklyn, and we built our own stuff. And so, in the very beginning, when we didn't have the resources to do things quote the right way, we were able to persevere, and that helped us attract a great group of investors that invested over and over and over again throughout the lifespan of the company, until finally in 2015 we realized that if we were going to do this, we had to really do this the right way and bring in a world-class team and build manufacturing that was state of the art. And we invested in South Brooklyn in a site called Industry City, where we built about 25,000 square feet of aseptic fill and finish manufacturing, so vaccine grade manufacturing. And today, that's the only aseptic fill and finish in the 5 boroughs of New York. And so we're the
Wow.
only biomanufacturer here. And that's something that we're incredibly proud of. And as a New Yorker myself, it's great to be able to walk to work and not have to commute. And it's also great to be able to hire out of our own backyard and hire people that grew up here in the city. That I mean, New York has this big problem where we educate a lot of engineers, and if those engineers want to work in a plant where they're actually making things in life sciences, they have to leave the city. And to me, that's unacceptable. And so we built here, and frankly, we're better off for it. And so we may have done things a little bit in an unorthodox fashion, where we had to front load a lot of the risk and a lot of the capital costs of building our own manufacturing, building our own sales team, building our own R&D labs. But we did it, and now the platform that allowed us to deliver Vetigel at that level, it means that the jump from Vetigel to CHG, to our first human product, is not that large at all. It makes it a lot easier, so that we're not needing to start all over from scratch.
Nice. So yeah, I've got a bunch of questions as usual because I'm really excited hearing all this. So um, so I'll start with the least exciting one, which is like what's the quantity of vertigo do you guys produce from that plant that you have now in New York?
So today we produce about 20,000 syringes of Vetigel on a monthly basis for the global market.
Well, well, so
Um,
that's
and and that's that's increasing.
Well, that's really good because obviously with the demand is growing as well, and the popularity of the technology is also increasing as well. And yeah, and the second part is I like when you mentioned that you found yourself in a situation where you either had to sink or swim, and you chose to swim. So, I mean, mentally, for people also thinking of starting startups and stuff, like what's the kind of stuff required, in terms of mental fortitude that you need to go through this? Do you need a strong team? Do you need to have certain characteristics as part of your personality? Like, what's the secret?
So all of the above, frankly, right? So I think that the most important part is a bit of naivete, right?
Yes.
You need to be blind enough to the challenges in front of you to be willing to run into a brick wall head first, and then second most importantly, but very close second, is having a good support system around you, and this is true for all founders of startups. But in my opinion, mental health for founders is not spoken about enough, and it's difficult. I mean, a lot of people, you hear the success stories, and you see the end result of it. You see the success, you see the happiness, you see a trajectory that looks like it's up and to the right. But in reality, that up and to the right only happened because there were a lot of ups and downs along the way, and typically more downs than ups in the very beginning. And so having that support system where you can understand and have people to lean on, and realize that you're not alone fighting against this massive unsolvable problem is critical. And I couldn't be here without my team, without my wife, without my family and friends who help me and support me, and make sure that uh, at the end of the day, when things get hard, that there's still some stability there.
True. No, thank you. That's really a good answer, and I think it's also. I mean, I even feel a bit inspired. So I've kind of
Mhm.
lost my words there. Then the most exciting question that I had, and everyone's probably wondering that, but how do you raise 100 million US dollars for a startup? How do you do that, Joe? And obviously I know you're articulate, so that's one thing I can give you, but I'm sure there's something else. Like, what would you say?
So I think that the most important thing, right, and one of the biggest benefits that we as Cresilon had in the very beginning, is that I can put together a 20-second GIF with no audio, no text, that shows you exactly what we do. And you get it, right? We have such a simple concept. The science may be difficult, the regulatory pathway, the risks may be very nuanced, and the use of proceeds may be very nuanced. But at the end of the day, we stop bleeding, and bleeding is bad, and having bleeding stopped quicker is better. And because we were able to distill our entire business down into something that could both show the efficacy of what we do and the magnitude of the problem, it made those investment conversations easier. And I'm not going to say very easy, but it allowed us to do that. And the second thing is allowing allowing yourself to phase out raising capital, where if you raise a seed round, when you raise a seed round, you say, here are the 3 to 5 things that I want to do with this capital. And the best thing you can do is more or less to do those 3 to 5 things about on time, and to show to investors that, and again, most any good investor, any investor that understands life sciences, knows that biology is one of the few things that you can't rush in this world. And so if a test takes 14 days, that test will always take 14 days. You can't throw more money at it and have cells grow faster or something like that. It will
Yes.
still take 14 days. And so when there's an error, you're going to be set back for some time. And so delays are common in this industry, but being upfront, communicating frequently with investors, and delivering on what you say you're delivering on, it means that our investors, the vast majority of our investors, have not only invested once, they've invested multiple times throughout the lifespan of our business. I have investors that started investing with us in 2013 and have invested in every single round that we've opened 10 years in.
Well, and from my understanding, you guys are not publicly listed at the moment,
No,
and
we're private.
the way you have raised the sort of like the capital, do you plan to become a unicorn now? Because obviously at this rate, there's solid confidence that I have that you guys could easily become a unicorn.
So the great thing about being a private company is that we only get to peg our valuation when we go out to raise capital, and at this point we're not in capital raising mode, and so as a founder that has spent more of my 13 years running this company than otherwise in capital raising mode, it's a nice reprieve from that, but maybe one day.
True. And just one last general question regarding raising capital, because obviously I know I've got an engineering background, just like yourself, Joe. And but did you find any differences there that you perhaps would have thought that this would be better being taught in engineering school in terms of helping startups? Know how to like raise money. Like, is there any particular jargon you had to learn? any things that you thought could be transferable for people coming from a STEM background? Because I think when it comes to money matters, it's usually the finance guys, right? The guys with the MBAs that seem to know all the language. And what about the rest of us?
Sure. So I love hiring engineers. I mean, frankly, engineers are the most hired background across the entire organization. So that doesn't matter whether we're talking sales or we're talking finance or we're talking engineering itself. We like hiring engineers here at Cresilon because the way that I view it is that when you get an engineering degree, there is, I'd say, 90% of what you learn in school you'll never use again, right? But what an engineer learns is an engineer learns a process, right? The fundamental of engineering, especially chemical engineering or bioengineering, is that you have a problem that is, or a real world system that is too complicated to distill into a model, right? There's, if you're going to distill bleeding or hemostasis into a system of equations, we'll be here for the next thousand of years or so, trying to put a system of equations together. And so engineers learn how to be lazy, right? How to be lazy in a clinical way. And what that means is how do you extract the variables in the system that actually matter? When you're presented with a problem that is too complicated to solve, how do you approximate that problem properly so you can make a problem that's solvable? And most engineering degrees focus on that. And maybe it's not said exactly that way, but if you've gone through an engineering system, right, you understand. Chemical engineers were the worst at this, right? If you have a system you don't know, you draw a box around it, you build a black box, and you just do a mass balance, right? What comes in must equal what comes out. Otherwise, it's getting lost in the box. And if it's getting lost in the box, we can complicate that, but we don't need to know what happens inside of the box. And that's a
Nice.
great mindset for this type of innovation because we're dealing with problem sets that are not exactly modelable in the real world. And so you have to approximate, you have to find ways to solve those problems. And an engineering mindset, in my opinion, is well suited to be able to tackle those challenges.
Nice, nice. Now that's good. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm sure a lot of my audience will be excited to hear that. And then going back to the CHG, because I think that's really exciting. I mean, was obviously from what you said, I understand you guys already have an infrastructure that you've already laid
Mhm.
out in terms of the foundations, from the experience you've gotten with the Vetigel. But now going forward to the CHG in terms of like, are you guys sort of like moving your goalposts a little bit within the company in terms of to accommodate now the new product you're gonna be designing? Is it gonna be a new product line? Is it gonna be potentially a new factory? Like, what does it look like right now in terms of the paperwork for
So, so
CHG?
just
Yeah,
so just to highlight the way that we
yeah.
do things, the beauty of CHG is that even though the indication is different, the indication is limited to external minor bleeding. CHG is exactly the Vetigel syringe, and it is exactly the gel in Vetigel. So it requires no new equipment. Now, that being said, we're still gearing up. There are a differing set of validations and paperwork that need to be done in order to bring the CHG manufacturing process into full compliance, and it will take some time before we can bring that product fully to market. But that being said, that this is one of the beauties of starting with our animal health industry is that we've front loaded most of this work. We've done the validations. We know how to make this product at scale. And then as we look at the next destination, which is Trauma Gel, our traumatic use product, right? That's a bigger syringe, but it's still the same gel, right? There will be few surprises as we scale because Vetigel today is being used in gunshot wounds. It's being used in stabbings and in motor vehicle accidents, albeit in dogs and cats and whales and dolphins and birds and just about anything else that walks the face of this earth. And so extrapolating that into humans will obviously take additional testing, but it's not the biggest stretch in the world, and we're not exactly going into uncharted territory here.
Nice. And just one thing, just to try to describe, what the vertigo or CHG potentially looks like. It's, as you showed, it looks like a yellow humus, sort of like honey kind of color.
Mhm.
And but there's an exciting thing though, that I saw on a video on YouTube, which I'll be adding it here for it. But I'll try. What happened was when they inserted the gel into the I think it was a liver that had been dissected and you had blood flowing through it. It sort of like hardened. I don't know if you could simplify that process for us. It's like, you inject it and then it sort of like hardens, changes color a little bit. Is that like a a reaction process, or what exactly is happening at that point?
So what I'll say with that is that I'm not exactly sure what video you're referring to, but if it's the
Yeah,
very first video, there's a video that we filmed back in the
it's an
dorm
old
rooms.
one.
It's a
It's an
very
old
old
one.
video,
Yes.
and that was one of the first prototypes of the gel, where this
Nice.
is because the gel was actually thinner
Oh
when we
well.
first invented it, and we've honed it over the years, and so nowadays, when you use a product like Vetigel or CHG, there's no perceptible color change or phase change in the product. And when I say no perceptible, that's critical there, because there actually is. If you look at the surface as the gel interacts, there's the gel will stiffen at the local surface, but so little that you don't actually notice it. And so it happens very subtly, only at the boundary between the gel and the tissue. When we first started, it was a little clunkier, and it's obviously been refined over the last
Yes.
decade or so.
It's quite inspiring to see that journey because it's like most of the stuff is documented on YouTube. You might find it scattered in different
Mhm.
places, but I think one thing that could happen is you could just get maybe an intern or one summer to just create a playlist with all the videos that have been made, since 2013 or so. It'll be quite interesting to see the chain of how the product is developed, which is quite inspiring. But then just coming back then to the CHG, because I'm really excited about it. That's why I probably can't get over it. But um, I know you said that most of the infrastructure you guys have already had right now, it's like you played chess. You already planned a few
Mhm.
moves ahead. Um, so, I mean, when can we expect to have it on the market? I know right now you're still getting that. I know it's been approved now, which is the biggest, thumbs up. But when can we expect it to be on the market? For just people curious. And I know in medtech it can be quite hard to
Yeah.
estimate things because you have to do tests and stuff. But from your own point of view, what would you say regarding that?
Sure. It'll very likely be in the next several months, and
Oh,
so either near the end of this year or early next year is when we're targeting launching. And what I'll say is, personally, when I do a launch, we like to do things the right way. And so
yes.
if that comes at the expense of taking a little bit of extra time to do it the right way, then so be it. It matters that the customer, that the patient has a good experience with the product as we launch, and so we need to make sure that everything is done properly and ready to go before we actually open up the floodgates.
Nice, nice. And do you have sort of like a commercialization plan? Because I know most people will be listening to this, they've got like sort of like a STEM background. But in terms of your plan to commercialize the product, is there certain things you could tell us or regarding that?
So the unique thing about CHG is that
Mm.
actually, and maybe this is an interesting point to discuss, that CHG is not the biggest market that we're entering, right?
Oh,
And so the value for Cresilon primarily in CHG is not because we wanted to commercialize a product that stops minor bleeding, but because it sets a predicate for an additional cohort of 510Ks that
well,
we're planning on submitting. And
nice.
so the most important thing is now we have FDA clearance on our gel for an indication. And that indication may not be the most exciting, it may not be the most profitable, it may not be the most life saving, but it means that for every application from this point forward that Cresilon submits, we will be able to use this initial application as our predicate. Or at least as one of the predicates. And so it drastically improves our ability to bring the next product to market faster. And so there's some exciting news that I can't exactly speak about right now,
Okay.
but as we look at where things go in the future, what we see is that CHG is really that jumping off point to allow us to commercialize into the next indication as quickly as we can. And so when we do bring CHG to market, it will likely be limited, just because, in my opinion, CHG will be followed by products that have much larger addressable markets, and much uh, more drastic benefits over standard of care to the end user and to the clinician.
Okay, so now we're back for the second part of this discussion or episode with Joe Landolina, who's the CEO of Cresilon. And in the first part, he described quite a lot of exciting things, but now we're just going to be continuing again because it's really exciting to hear what's happening at Cresilon, how they've been basically developing the technology over the last 13 years. It's really impressive to look at that track record. And for any investor, you can't blame them for just throwing money at you guys because there's a track record that's being proven. But now, getting onto the other side of things that maybe that might not be so mainstream. I mean, your partnership with the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. How did you guys make that bond? How was that formed, Joe? If you know.
So it Walter Reed is a super exciting partnership. It's exciting for me for one primary reason, which is that this is the first formal partnership exploring an indication for the use of our technology that is not purely hemostasis, so not purely stopping bleeding, and we can talk about that in a second. But it came about in a really interesting way. So we had I was on the news, I was on a local news channel,
Yeah.
and we were talking about Cresilon, and the director of the neuroscience division at Walter Reed was watching the news and saw me, and they were dealing with the challenge, which is penetrating ballistic like brain injury, and so she called me. So the I my caller ID said Walter Reed. And so I picked up and we had a conversation, and we hit it off. And it turned out that what we were doing and what they were doing had a good number of synergies, and so we entered into what's called a CRADA, which is a cooperative research agreement, and we were able to start that partnership, and the things have been going really well.
And just to and just for the audience that are based in Europe, because majority of my audience is based in Europe, Walter Reed Army Institute of Research is basically one of the largest sort of like biomedical research facilities. That's sort of like under the United States Department of Defense. So it's quite a massive lab, basically, or a research center. So I guess for you, at first when you saw that call, you might have second thought for a second that maybe it could have been a scam or something because that's how good the news was for you. And looking at that, so does it mean now that there is potentially in the pipeline products that are going to come to Crestland or from Crestland because of this partnership?
Exactly, and so what we're exploring under this partnership is the use of our technology to treat an injury to the brain after what's called penetrating ballistic like brain injury, and so that can be from a bullet, that can be from shrapnel, it can be from any other type of injury that penetrates the skull. And in these types of injuries, there exists no standard of care today to be able to stabilize that the patient, and so that means that most of these patients die with these types of injuries, or at least are severely disabled. And so, what we've been working with Walter Reed on is seeing whether or not the same mechanical barrier that allows us to stop bleeding can have any effect in stabilizing the brain, or assisting with the coverage of these types of injuries after these types of highly severe injuries. And so we've been in the middle of some studies looking at that right now. And what I'll say is that things are looking very optimistic at this point, and I can't discuss results right away. But
Yeah.
what I also will caution is that it took us 13 years to bring a product that stops bleeding to market, or maybe 10 years to bring a product that stops bleeding to market. And so while this partnership is incredibly exciting, it will likely take quite a bit of time before this is actually commercially available. But at the very least, it's promising and it's exciting because it really shows the potential for this technology platform.
No, that's really good. And just a quick question from just a general point of view, and for other people with, startups or meta companies or any company in general, when you form such a partnership with a huge sort of like well-known or well-renowned institute, do you get to pick on some of their brains? Because I'm sure there's plenty of PhDs there or top brains there. Do you get to then pick on their brains? You know, and get some information there that could also then help the product you have right now? Or what's the partnership looking like at the minute?
So it depends, right? And
Yes.
what I'll say is that every CRADA, every joint development agreement for anything, there are a wide variety of terms and of restrictions and requirements. But the thing that's the same is that there gets to be collaboration between our R&D teams and the scientists at Walter Reed, and that's been amazing. And there are and so many ideas shared, and the way that the team at Walter Reed looks at problems is both same and different to the way that my team looks at problems. And in having them in the same room working side by side on these types of problems, nothing but good can come of that.
Nice, nice. I'm really happy to hear that. It's always exciting when you hear this because most of the research or that ends up being products tend to come from either universities or research institutes. So it's good to hear that. But one thing that I forgot to ask earlier, and I wanted to ask this,
Mm-hmm.
is that in the event of or a trauma or obviously when someone's bleeding, and the Vetigel is inserted or the CHG is inserted into their body, like how long can the gel remain in place for? In terms of like, I didn't get to talk about that, but I'm
Sure.
really interested. Yeah.
So it depends on the indication. So when
Okay.
we talk about CHG, CHG is an external only product, which means that it's indicated to be left in contact with the patient for up to 24 hours
Oh,
before being removed. Because again, in these cases, the expectation is that that wound or the injury is non-sterile, and so just like a band-aid or a bandage, you'll want to change that to ensure that the patient is healthy and that injury doesn't get contaminated. For Vetigel, Vetigel is a surgical product. So the indication there is that Vetigel can be implanted and left inside of the patient. And so that means that routinely it's about 50-50. Where some surgeons will leave Vetigel inside the patient. It's sugar based, so it'll break down and resorb over time.
wow.
Or on the other hand, you can remove the product in its entirety. And that's a great feature of this technology. So that
Wow.
the in the first half when we talked about the mechanism of action and that lack of porosity in the material where you can take it off without pulling the clot off. One of the really cool things that you can do with Vetigel is you can put this onto an injury, especially a very critical bleed, let's say in spine surgery. And the bulk of the time that's spent during a spine surgery is actually waiting for bleeding to stop. Because if blood is covering the spinal cord and you can't see where the spinal cord is, you risk injuring that patient or perhaps paralyzing them for life. And so you need to, every time you make an incision that results in bleeding, control that bleeding properly. And the challenge is that if the product that you use has to stay in place, or if you take it off, it'll cause the patient to rebleed. You're putting more and more stuff into the surgical field, which tends to be very constricted and small. And having a product like Vetigel allows you to put it in, stop the bleed, and then several seconds later, you can wash the product off in its entirety, and you have what we call a dry field, meaning the surgical field no longer has blood in it, and you can visualize perfectly what you're doing. And so that's a massive leap forward in surgery, and something that, and while we don't have clearance or approval for yet in the human space, something that we're already doing today in animal health that we're looking forward to being able to eventually translate into human medicine.
Well, that's really like a stroke of genius, isn't it? To sort of like find the perfect balance between making it create or make inserting it and helping the body create a clot or a sort of like a seal to prevent that blood
Mm-hmm.
from bleeding, and at the same time designing it smart enough that even if certain bits were left when it's extracted, those bits don't bioaccumulate because they and let me not use big words. They don't end up in the body because then it can sort of like dissolve into the body, and that's one of the things on this podcast that I try to do. I try to use as much as I know all these big words. I try to keep them simple, and that's why I called it 101, so that other people can easily digest it, so that it's easy for them to understand. And just looking at that, like how long did it take you to find that sort of like equilibrium and balance, Joe, when you're developing this as a teenager? How many hours did you spend in that lab just coming up to this
So
point?
So frankly, I would argue that we're still searching for that perfect balance. Everything is still a work in progress. The product gets better year over year because we're doing more and more of this research. And so it also, I can take almost no credit for that. I was the one who found the system. I found the concept for the technology. I've been the steward to bring it to market. But I have a team of far better scientists and engineers than I'll ever be, that actually make this a reality and that actually do the legwork to find that balance themselves.
True. And just a quick question, regarding of on some of the or some ideas that I have, regarding what the properties of the gel have based on my experience is I know you mentioned the problem of jams, and I think it exists anywhere. You know, when you got a wound, you got to think about the infection and everything. Have you guys thought of sort of like inserting some sort of like antibiotics into the gel that sort of like slowly is, released during that,
Mhm.
24 hours when they have it there? Because then, at least, okay, you've stopped the bleeding, but at the same time, you have also sort of like contained the, infection to that area.
Exactly, and so that is a focus area of ours. And so, one of the great things about this technology platform is that it's effectively a mechanical barrier that is biocompatible and doesn't like to move from where you put it once you put it there, and it will go away in a prescribed amount of time. And so, the benefit of that is that you can translate that into additional applications. So, drug delivery, whether you're delivering antibiotics or you're delivering something else, is something that's of quite a bit of interest to us. Now, per the strategy that we have of what we call path of least regulation, meaning going from the simplest markets and expanding out, mixing a gel in or mixing a drug into the gel is much more complicated to ensure that the patient gets the right dosing every single time. And so, while we're looking into that's not very near term in our strategy of launching products, but nonetheless, it's an area of focus of ours.
Well, no, that's really good. I'm excited to hear that. And in terms of like obviously, you already have other things in place. We have the human capital, all the funding you've gotten and everything. But I mean, now as the company is growing, are you guys going to be recruiting more people in a short amount of or in the near future? For people listening here and thinking this is a great company, maybe I'd want to be probably be a part of. Are you guys hiring, Joe?
So we have about 75 full-time employees here, and about 40 open positions right now.
Well,
So we're hiring pretty aggressively, and so anyone who's interested can look us up.
definitely. I'll put the link as well to where people can look and try to apply in the link below as well. But then
Perfect.
now, touching more on the humans on the human side of Joe Landolina, maybe which people don't really get to hear. Um, I mean, from your time in the industry, Joe, I mean, you've been working now for 13 years, and the concept which you had as a 17-year-old has already been proven to
Mhm.
work. Like, what stops you from just packing your bags and heading to the Bahamas? Because I know it's not that far from New York, and just hanging your feet on a hammock for the rest of your life. Like, what keeps you coming to the office every day? Like, what's motivating you?
Sure. I mean, frankly, I talk with my wife about this all the time, and with friends. It's that if you had to ask me at any point in my life, whether it was when I was 17 or today or any point in the middle, and you ask me what is your dream job, it would be exactly what I'm doing today. And I consider myself incredibly lucky for that. I know that not everybody has that, and that but it's amazing to be able to be doing the work that I do. It's just I have a great team. We are solving an important problem, and we can see the effects of that problem pretty clearly and pretty immediately, meaning that we're saving lives every day, and I love having a part of that. And the engineer in me loves solving problems, and my biggest pet peeve is solving the same problem every day. So it's really nice to be able to be given a different problem every single day to solve. So I wouldn't trade for the world. It's a lot of fun doing what I do, and also from a company strategy or from a corporate strategy perspective, there's such an amazing growth curve from this point forward. The human clearance is really just the very beginning of the next chapter of Cresilon's history, and being able to see the company go from a couple of idiots in a dorm room like us to 75 people that are actually able to save lives at some sort of scale, to where we're going from this point forward, which is hopefully becoming standard of care for hemostasis in human surgery. That's going to require quite a bit more scale than we even have today, and I'm excited for what's to come.
Well, that's really good. That's really good. And in terms of how you've also been adding to that team, when I was researching, I see you guys also looking at talent also from abroad as well. And you taking them in and you helping them settle into New York. But, from a person I was quite fortunate to pass through New York once in my life
Mm-hmm.
in the summer. But I mean, what's the process that you take these guys through? I mean, what's New York like as a New Yorker? What could you try to say to the rest of the people most listening here? Probably sitting in their room in London or somewhere in Europe or somewhere else in the world, when you guys bring this talent to nature, this growth, like how have you guys been finding all the different cultures coming through?
Sure. So starting with that, you need a diverse team. You need people from all walks of life and all over the world because, again, I always joke that a PhD is a 6-year process in learning how to think inside the box sometimes, right? And the more you spend in one place at one company, the more you learn how to do things exactly for that one place or one company. And so we need ideas from all over. We need people who have come up through different programs because if I only hire engineers that did the exact program that I did, then there are going to be very few good ideas that come about, and I'm going to have a lot more people agreeing with me here, and so that's one thing. And so it's really important to have a team of people that are very well rounded, but for me, I'm obviously biased. I was born here in New York, and I make the conscious decision every day to stay in New York. And I'm lucky to do quite a bit of travel and spend a lot of time in various places all around the world. And there's an energy about New York that I love, especially around innovation. And there's an immediacy to New York where the pace it's such a fast city, and you can find anything you want. I mean, if you're in southwestern China and you find this dish that you can only get in one city, I guarantee you that you'll find a restaurant in New York of an immigrant from that city who came here and makes that one dish. And there are very few places in the world where you can truly say that, like you can say
Well,
that here in New York. And so it's such an amazing place that it allows us to attract that talent. Because what I'll say is that, yes, we're a decent company, and we have a great product and a compelling mission, but New York also attracts people as well, and
well,
it's nice. It's nice being here in the center of that, especially today as the only biomanufacturer here. It gives us a really nice ability to be part of our community here in New York.
makes sense. And that's really good that, you also, as much as you bring talent from abroad, you're not neglecting the local talent. You're still nurturing for that as well, to also rejuvenate,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of like talent that's around there and keep it growing, right? Um, I mean, in terms of you guys being there, because from what I understand, feel free to correct me here, but my understanding is most of the tech scene in the US, particularly for medtech, biotech, it's split between Silicon Valley and Boston. So, you guys being a little bit out of the way, does that then allow you guys to focus, or does it mean every time you have to attend a conference, you find yourself either traveling longer distances, or how does it? What's the advantage of the location is when you look at at the broader network?
So what I'll say is that, I mean, that's true, but it's primarily a real estate problem.
All right.
One of the challenges with New York is that we're on an island, literally on an island, and what that means is that there are no, or very few at least, green fields that you can build a building in.
Wow.
If you want to do something in New York, if you want to do biomanufacturing, you have to convert a building that's already there or knock it down and build it again, which is a lot more expensive than what I can afford. And if you're in Silicon Valley or you're in Boston or other biotech hubs like the Research Triangle in North Carolina or in San Diego, the ability to build what's called greenfield construction is much better. Meaning, if you want to, you could just build a biomanufacturing plant and you could just drop it somewhere, and now you have new real estate, and you could have talent there. And so with New York, the biggest challenge was getting over that hurdle. But Pfizer was founded here in Brooklyn. And
Wow.
so if you drive around Brooklyn and you go onto Flushing Avenue, you'll find there's a building that says Chaz Pfizer on it, and that was the original Pfizer site. And so one thing that we're very proud of is that when Pfizer shut down in the early 2000s, the first biomanufacturer to come back into New York since Pfizer was Cresilon. And
Wow.
so there's a deep history of doing that type of manufacturing here. It just hasn't been here for a while because New York tends to focus mainly in finance
Yes.
or in fashion or in other industries. And having hard manufacturing is not something that New York has done in a very long time, since the Second World War, primarily. And so it's really nice to bring this back. And so what I'll say is that for a New Yorker, we have very local. New Jersey is right next door to us, and in New Jersey, there's quite a bit of biotech and med device, and that means that we have a great talent pool that we can poach from and move them into the other side of the river over here.
Yeah.
And so what I'll say is that I spend a bit of time in Boston and a bit of time in the Bay Area and
Yes.
in Silicon Valley, but it's not as much as you'd think. We New Yorkers are self sufficient.
Nice, nice. Now that's really good to hear that. And I mean, just with the looking at the sort of like the potential and capabilities that this technology has, you guys have just gotten this, FDA approval for human use. So I guess it's really exciting times right now at Cresilon and everything. But in terms of like your long term views, like what do you think in terms of like your thoughts on the future? And this doesn't have to be only like now. It could be what you think the where the market is going to be going in 10 years time or even 20 years. I don't know. Because other people tend to work with the sort of like the communistic style of 5-year plans. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on the future, Joe?
So the future is incredibly bright for Cresilon right now, and it's something that is incredibly exciting because this first FDA clearance is the catalyst for a number of things to come. And what I will say on that is that being able to position our product to reduce the risk of bleeding to near zero for the
Wow.
world. And that means whether you've scraped your knee or you go in for brain surgery or there's a motor vehicle accident or a gunshot wound, whether that's in a human or in a pet or in anything else that can possibly bleed, Cresilon will be there for that in the next several years. But more importantly, I'm a strong believer that a one product company isn't quite a company itself, right? And the biggest thing on Cresilon's radar today is diversification. Uh, we are interested and are currently working on building out a product portfolio that expands beyond hemostasis. And the Walter Reed collaboration is the first step into that, but it's not the only step into that. Things like drug delivery that we discussed, right?
Yes.
Building Cresilon into a fully functioning biotech company, a company that can assist clinicians wherever they are for these types of smart biomaterials is something that I'm very interested. My team is very interested in becoming that solutions provider, and we're well on our way to getting there.
So I was just taking a note there of one thing you mentioned, and it's quite exciting in terms of also being there for clinicians. That point. So,
Mhm.
do you plan to get the Chrysler products into the first aid box? Like the kits with the first aid. Is that the plan by making it being there for clinicians that it's something you can't go to camp without?
Exactly. I mean, frankly, that's one of the very next indications that we're focusing on is looking at trauma care, both
Yes.
prescription as well as eventually OTC. To be used by the average consumer.
Nice. Now then, sort of like, and then towards the end of this, but I just want to also just ask something to pique your brain because I didn't say this earlier, but I was quite fortunate myself to, have been part of invention also when I was relatively young, but not as young as 17 as you, Joe. But when I was about 21, I found myself in a met company that was working on a new product, and I worked on it and on a new product for about 13 months, building the operating system for them. And this product was is for chemo patients to help them prevent nerve cell damage. And so I worked on it, created the interfaces, built the entire operating system, because it was nothing when I started. But then the patent was published last year, right, with my name on it. So I felt quite good, and I'm sure you also felt quite good when the patent came there with your name on it. But I
Mhm.
mean, could you just, some people have asked me this. I've never answered this question myself, but I'll ask you, like, what was your sort of like process, mentally when you were creating this invention? Because you don't seem to get this in any textbook. You know what I mean? It's like it's not something that's out there. What was your process, of problem solving, of inventing this gel? You
Sure.
know?
What I always tell people, because I used to, one of my favorite jobs that I ever had besides this was I used to help out with a class of 400 students a semester at NYU for entrepreneurship
Wow.
and coach them through the invention process. And I used to get this question all the time. And the one thing that I say is that if you sit down in a room and you say, I'm going to invent something now, you're very unlikely to invent something. And so there's this formula to innovation or to
Yeah.
invention that you need to be in the right place at the right time. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was starting, because I when I came up with this idea, I went to a professor of mine and asked for advice. And what I said was, look, I love this idea, but I'm not going to be able to start a biotech company. I'm 17 years old, right? And so I had a couple of other ideas jotted down in a notebook. And what his advice to me was, Joe, I want you to close your eyes and imagine yourself at your retirement party. Are you retiring from any of these ideas? And if the answer is no, then don't even start now, and because it's going to be a hard process. And so I think that there has to be this perfect combination of being in the right place in the right time with just enough expertise to be able to solve the problem. But it has to be a problem that you're truly passionate about. And if you're not passionate about solving that problem, then you're not going to be able to motivate yourself to get through the steps that are necessary. And that was really important for me, where the driving force through all of this was not the desire to have an invention or the desire to make money or or to save patients necessarily. It was that I was truly passionate about what it was that we were doing and how we were doing it, and for that, that's the purest type of motivation, and that makes it hardest to get demotivated when start or things start to hit the fan and things start to fall apart as you go in,
Yeah.
and so not to make this too long-winded of an answer, but I started this invention was basically an academic project in the beginning. It wasn't supposed to become a company. We were doing this because we were just interested in it, and I wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted to go to medical school, and what I like to say is a Cresilon got in the way of that. It was a wrench in the works, but at the end of the day, being able to take this step by step, it was that passion that pushed us through these steps when things got hard, when things got fuzzy. It gave us the way, or it at least gave us the energy and the motivation to continue to push through.
Definitely, I can sort of like relate to what you're saying, because when you're creating something that's not been done before, you can't just quickly Google it. You can quickly check what's been done, because it's a
Mhm.
process of going through that steps, and sometimes you find difficulties and you overcome them. But I mean, then this is just the last question that I have for you, Joe. Um, I mean, you've done a good job from working in R&D, and I know you're still heavily involved with the R&D part as well of the company, because I think that's what you're really passionate about, and that's the thing that's keeping you away from the Bahamas, as we discussed. But I mean, how do you balance that, sort of like skill between R&D and your investors? And because that's it's like a it's not it's a unique combination, because usually people are either R&D or finance related, but how do you juggle the two? And this is just out of my own curiosity, because I'm really inspired by the work you're doing.
So what I'll say is that you have to be in a CEO founder role. You have to be really comfortable bringing in people that are better than you at every function.
Well,
Right? It's not about focusing on one thing. It's about becoming a hyper generalist, being able to be really good at knowing the best person to put in place to bring your company's vision, your vision, to light. And that's something that I've learned over the years. It wasn't always easy, but both from R&D to the investment side, it's about building teams that I can fall back on,
well,
and being the conductor. Where I always describe myself as more of a cook than a baker, meaning I'm not one to follow a recipe or write a recipe, and
yes,
and so you don't want me in a lab. It's I can have a lot of great ideas, but actually doing rigorous science is not exactly my forte,
yeah,
and so I need a great team behind me, and so I think one of the things that we've done really well here at Cresilon is we've built that team, and we haven't been afraid to make changes where changes are needed, in order to ensure that we're constantly growing, constantly evolving, and that we are moving in the right direction at all times. And so if you look at where I was 13 years ago, I was an engineer's engineer, and today I'm probably seem much more like a CEO that came up a finance track, because that's what's needed for this business. And so
yes,
it's about stretching out of your comfort zone and getting to do a new thing every day. And some days I'm a regulatory person, and some days I'm a sales guy, and other days I'm a scientist, and it makes everything interesting and exciting. But at the very least, I know I don't need to be the best salesperson or the best scientist or the best regulatory guy, because I've got a great team here.
well, no, that's really good. And yeah, so before we close it off, I just want to say, like, thank you, Joe, for coming on the podcast. You're a huge inspiration to me, and I'm sure to many other people. You hear this all the time. I admire how you've been able to stay focused on this goal and what you're bringing to the market, how you're going to be changing lives or already changing lives, essentially. And yeah, so now thank you very much. It's just really good, having you on here today. And I hope in the future, as you bring more products, I'll try squeeze in another, mini episode just to do a catch up and, see what's new and what's exciting for people to know. So yeah, thank you very much.
Amazing. And Rodney, thank you so much for the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, no worries. Okay, have a good day.